everybody, it's Michelle Hensley, and I am in studio today with the Associate Director, Mary Nolen from Center Indy. Hi, Mary.
Hey.
And we also today have the Residential Director from Center Indy, Gina Colclazier. So,
hi, Michelle.
Welcome, Gina. We have covered a lot of topics so far. I think we've had a few episodes that we've had your dad in, Mary, and you've been in.
Yes.
And we're going to just continue along that line. But we really wanted to talk a little bit more in depth today about human trafficking. So I know that both of you are very well versed on this subject and that you actually do presentations. In fact, you just came from a presentation.
Yep.
So you're used to talking about this. You've done some extensive training. So my very first question, as simple as what this may sound to the two of you, there are a lot of people that do not know what exactly is human trafficking.
Well, Michelle, according to the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act, sex trafficking is defined as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act. So that's the official term.
So can you put that in layman's terms? So, to me, I mean, that sounds great, and I'm sure that's very politically correct.
Sure, absolutely.
But as, a mom and a stay-at-home mom or somebody that may not be in this industry, what exactly is that?
So really, it's just where there are people out there that desire to do things that meet their own needs, and they are going to go out and they are going to recruit. They're going to take hostage. They're going to transport. They're going to snatch. They're going to groom individuals who they feel like is going to meet their purpose and the need that they have. That is geared around largely around the Commercial Sex Act.
And who does this affect? I mean, I know there's a misconception in the media. We've talked about that a little bit, but let's cover some of that, the misconceptions in the media, and who does this really affect?
Yeah, so I'll just chime in for a second that there's labor trafficking and there's sex trafficking. And so those are both included under human trafficking. Mm-hmm. And so what we've really focused on here at the Hope Center is sex trafficking, but there is still a huge problem of labor trafficking in the United States. And so there's a lot that people can research about that, especially at Polaris Project online and that sort of thing, if they want to know more about labor trafficking, because that's a really big problem as well.
Yeah, and your focus isn't just sex trafficking, it's specific to an age group and to females.
Yes, yeah. So we serve women here, women over the age of 18, typically 18 to 45 years old here.
Okay, so that narrows down a little bit of what we're talking about, but I still don't think it covers the idea of what people have about trafficking.
Sure.
So typically, up to my experience of being here at Hope Center and volunteering here, my perception of trafficking was that van that came by and kidnapped somebody and shipped them overseas and you never saw them again. Kind of what you see on TV or in the movies. But that's really not realistic, is it?
Right. No,
absolutely. And I think that's what most people think. You think about the movie Taken, and that's where we feel like most people have misconceptions. But the reality of it is, and Mary will talk about this a little bit later, but, one of the main places that we find from women that have been through here is they are trafficked by their family members or someone that they've loved, a partner or someone.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's really... people every day.
I think, some of and again, just the Polaris Project online really shows a lot of statistics about this, and they try to update them every year. But, the scenario that someone is taken by a stranger is typically less than 10% of the cases. So while it can still happen, it's really not the majority of the case. And so we really see that, I remember when I was the children's minister at my church, we would do, child sexual abuse seminars to think about that. And a lot of times they would say like 90% of the time it was someone they knew that was sexually abusing them as a child. And the same proves to be true here, is that it really is someone who has looked at them and has began grooming them to be recruited into this. And one of the stats that I've seen too is that the average age for someone in the United States to be trafficked is the age 17. Mm-hmm.
So that actually leads us up to my next question is, there's a recruitment process.
Yeah.
So there's actually been studies done, and you have information on how recruitment takes place. Can you can you share with us about?
Absolutely. It's called a grooming process. And what they do is they target oftentimes youth or women who are vulnerable and in need of emotional care and support, who maybe have absent fathers or come from broken homes. And they will actually target them and groom them, and they start out helping them to believe that they are important and valuable. They often give them gifts, make them feel very special and loved, like a princess. And then they move in, and after a while, they begin to basically switch and use tactics like you said, coercion and force and abuse, things like that will make them want to stay.
Yeah. You know what blew my mind when I first started working here was just to know that there's actually books online that you can order that are written by pimps that say how to be a pimp. They really
You're
do
kidding
have
me.
no, and so it's we've had a few people say like don't give them any more money, but if you can look into it, I mean it's a whole strategy. It's all manipulation, and when you read certain memoirs even of women survivors, you can see the process through what they share, especially when it's somebody who he's looking for a girl to date, or he's looking for someone to date that he can get her away from her family. He can get her isolated, absolutely, to make her more vulnerable. And he'll, those first 3 or 4 months, just be the best boyfriend ever and make her fall in love with him. And I mean, again, like we've read facts or quotes, I should say, from traffickers that will say, this is what you do in the first 3 months. This is what you do. And then now this is what you do. And you bring the hammer down, and it makes her feel like she's going crazy because you've changed so quickly and she doesn't understand why. And so it's very tragic when it comes to, particularly when it comes to that intimate partner, or that they call it Romeo pimp strategy.
Yeah.
And it's not just Romeo pimp strategy, it's also family members.
Yeah. So then that's a whole other department basically. But yeah, if they're going to recruit a family member, usually I'm sure that starts at a young age, but sometimes it doesn't. We've seen that too. Mm-hmm. It's really just them working behind the scenes to put her in a position where she's forced to do these things.
So do you see that a lot in drug addiction? You hear of the families that sell their children because they're addicted to drugs. Mm-hmm. Is that a myth or is that a reality?
I mean, that's definitely a reality. We have residents in the past and that have talked about the fact that they have been used for drugs, or that they have been forced into drugs to be able to perform. When working with women, I would say probably 95% of the women that we take in have a drug issue or have had past drug issues. And in just recently talking with one, she shared how the correlation between the things that she were made to do versus drugs. And she shared very honestly that she wouldn't have been able to do what she did without drugs. Mm-hmm. And so it was really a way of her to cope and to be able to do the things that she had to do was the drugs.
So it's sort of self-medicating.
Well, it helped her survive.
Her survive.
Helped her survive. That's right. So
she wouldn't be able to do the things that she were asked to do from the pimps and those who purchased her, to be honest. And so for her, those two went hand in hand.
So we've talked about kind of how it happens and what they do, but where do these ladies come from?
Everywhere.
Yeah, they really do. We're part of the Samaritan's Women Institute, and we'll talk a little bit about more of that later. But, one of the things that they really talked about in a seminar that I just came from is that the landscape is changing. Mm-hmm. And I think even the stereotypical, this is a male, that is coming in and coercing these women and whatever, but the landscape is changing now. Now they're using youth or teens or their own peers to go in. Mm-hmm. With all of the online pornography sites and dating sites and apps and things like that are going on, they're now using, everything's virtual. So they're now using young teens and young women to go in and recruit other women. So there's this whole tide changing with the online aspects, and the whole virtual COVID really got that going and underway because of not being able to be in close proximity. So, and where are they getting them at? They're getting them everywhere. Education, school, colleges, elementary.
So wait a second, you just said colleges. So we're not talking about just economically challenged areas or low income or maybe children or young individuals who don't have opportunities. You're talking about college students and everywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, remember, the one of the biggest things that they're looking for is just the ability for the woman who feels emotionally depleted or hollow or lonely or isolated. So no matter what economic background they come out of, it doesn't really matter. It depends on where they are, and they will go in and recruit them. You know, people that want to have a group, they want to have friends to hang out with or things like that, so they will go in and recruit them. Foster care is another big one that they get into to be able to recruit from.
Yeah. So just going back to the colleges for a second, I think that, you know, we've seen there's a big wave of, like Gina was saying, of what can be done online and online ads, and traffickers are really targeting colleges now, young women in colleges, because they're trying to say, hey, do you need a way to pay your student loans? Do you need this, you know, and this is an easy way to do it. And so that's a hard, I think, I'm trying to think of the websites that they talked about, like sugar daddy websites. It's a big problem right now. And I know, I mean, we're close to IU, and IU was high on the list of one that was how many users from there were on these websites.
A sugar daddy website. So there is a website out there where,
I'm trying to think, was it called Sugar Daddy or Sugar Baby? Or
there was one called Chatterbait.
That one
That they do. But yeah, the sugar daddy websites that they can go in and go on to.
Yeah, so it's like, and then as Gina was saying, like there's so much online that's just happening, and then they'll persuade, or whether it's by force, but often probably by force, this young lady who's one of the top performers on the website to then like explain why other girls should do it too. And so then she's recruiting on their behalf, and so it looks different, right? It doesn't look like this shady guy at the bus stop. It looks like this girl that's trying to recruit you. So there's a lot of different ways. But as Gina said too, foster care, there's a study that I saw, and there's a couple, you know, you always have to look at several different studies, but there's a study I saw in 2013 by the FBI that said 60% of trafficking survivors had been in foster care at one point in their life. And so as she was saying, like it really depends on that need that they see. If they see some sort of need, and I think a lot of people can say when they look at someone that's been in foster care, there's just they just realize maybe she doesn't have a strong family connection, and she doesn't, or he, obviously a lot of male victims as well, but you know, they're just looking for something to exploit. I mean, that's the heart of the matter. They're manipulating her need for something to exploit her, and so that's what happens.
So they use the insecurity, the fear,
and you know, I remember there's one young lady that we met at our Samaritan Women Institute for Shelter Care training who said that she heard that this is how traffickers recruit women, and she was like, this could have been my sister and me. Like, you know, at what time has every woman on the earth, or, you know, has felt insecure about something? Every woman has wanted to be loved, or has wanted to have someone that loves her unconditionally. And so it's really, I remember her speaking about that and just saying, that's why I got into this, because it's but for the grace of God that the wrong person didn't come in contact with me when I was at my lowest.
Absolutely. How many times have you not felt pretty enough or good enough or welcome or part of a group or left out? And I think all of us can identify with that.
And just like knowing that it's never that girl's fault, you know, it's someone took advantage of her, right? And so it's, you know, when ladies come here, you know, if they're ever feeling guilt about something or whatever, you know, it's like just trying to help them to see, hey, like you have to recognize that people were actively coming against you. And it's hard, but like you can't beat yourself up for a foolish choice that you made here or there, because I mean, they were plotting against you.
Right. They were targeting you.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback on the guilt, I think the guilt is a big hook. When we meet and talk with the residents here, they really struggle with just that whole guilt aspect, and that's actually what keeps them enslaved and trapped into with their traffickers, because, you know, so many people step back and say, hey, this is a choice. Why don't they leave? Why don't they get away? But the reality of it is when they're in the midst of it, somewhere along the line, their trafficker, their pimp, or, you know, their abuser has kept them locked in by by guilt. You know, you had a choice, you've chosen this, you know, you took the drug, you did the, you know, deed, you did the phone call. And so it's a big one that keeps people enslaved. And I think people that look at it from the outside, I know before I, you know, came here and really began to research, I've always just had a heart for working with women, you know, in just desperate need or in transition or, you know, of needing hope and healing. But, you know, really when I began to study about trafficking, it really opened a whole new perspective for myself, because on the surface, it does look like they have a choice in many cases. And when you start really looking at the grooming process and how it really started from a very early age, and depending on the trauma history and the history of where this was introduced into their life, you realize, if you look at it from a broader perspective, that it really wasn't a choice. They really just kind of went along based on what they felt like. Yeah, was the right thing.
And like you said, surviving. And here's the thing too, right? If you get back to the grooming process, the recruiting process, part of what these pimpology books teach is how to strip her of her humanity.
Yes.
And so, I mean, she is, oh my goodness, they have done their best to weaken her, you know, to just the very core of who she is. I mean, really what they're trying to say is they're trying to strip her of her humanity and turn her into a commodity. That's, you know, that's the evil on their part. And so for her, she's got it's those moments when she remembers her value is when she tries to come back.
So I want to circle back around, because you guys have touched on a few subjects that I definitely want to dive a little bit deeper into before we go too much further. One, you talked about that they were using women to target other women. And I know, Gina, you and I had the conversation about just that lifestyle, and there's a hierarchy within the system. You know, when a pimp has several women underneath him, they actually have branding and they have a hierarchy, and there's usually a woman who's in charge. Even though she's being trafficked, she in turn is trafficking. Can you kind of explore that a little bit? And I'd like to get into that and talk about, because there's a misconception about how that is ran and kind of that lifestyle of what that looks like behind the scenes.
I would just say first too, like every situation is probably unique. And so we just want to humbly say, like, it can look different from a lot of different places. But yeah, I'll go ahead and speak on that.
I'll just agree with Mary there. I think when we step back, we really have to look at each situation as unique, and it's unique to the person. But we have heard and had conversations with women who have been branded. We are trying to work with tattoo artists to come in and really help, you know, do pro bono removal tattoos or covering up. Because again, it's just that whole mentality of, these are my property and I'm going to put my brand on them. And that really does psychological damage to a lot of the women to look at that branding on them.
So the branding, we're talking about tattoos that are actually physically put on these women, and each pimp will have a different tattoo, and he tattoos all of his women with these tattoos.
Yeah, I mean, there have been cases absolutely where they will brand their particular brand so that in these rings or these different scenarios that they will know who they belong to, and that's my property, and don't bother it.
Yeah,
that's so horrific.
Yeah, and I think it depends, like I said, on where they're at. So, like, yeah, if they're in an area where there's a lot of trafficking happening and there's a lot of pimps, then like it's considered really disrespectful for a woman who is under this pimp to even talk to a different pimp. Like they call that like being out of pocket. And so like it's a whole culture, I guess. There's a whole set of rules for that. And as you said, there is a hierarchy that typically, you know, as he's training up women who are that he's working with, that he's exploiting, he's trying to make promises to them of like, hey, if you do this and this, then I'll basically promote you to this position or like reward her for that or whatever. And so a lot of times it's the ladies that have been working for him for several years that will then get promoted to that top position. And then, you know, and then that may be like, that's kind of her reward, you know, in a sense.
Yeah, so, you know, one of the things we've heard them say is, I don't want to be the bottom girl. You know, nobody wants to be the bottom girl, and that really just means, you know, you're kind of the low man on the totem pole. which really sets up a whole dynamic of competition and being competitive and power struggles. I had a conversation once with a resident who, she was really trying to overcome that desire to be competitive. One of her things was her trafficker would let her sit in the front seat while the rest of them sat in the back, so she would get to sit in the front passenger seat. And so one of the things that she was doing to try to overcome that was purposefully not ask for the front passenger seat when she traveled with our residential program here and we do outings. So that was one of her ways of overcoming that. And just realizing that whoever gets to sit in that front seat, it could be power move on her part. But yeah, there's the whole power dynamics that most people don't really realize when we work with the women.
And so they've been programmed.
Like I said, they're really trying to strip them of their humanity in so many ways. And I think traffickers do it because of, I think they exploit people because of they want money, but they also want power. And so those two are the biggest reasons, right, of why they're even doing it in the first place.
Aside from the lingo, I want to go back, and we have this lifestyle. I know we were just talking about the lifestyle, but I want to go back and I want to talk about how this sounds. So when you're talking about pimps, it sounds like prostitution. And I know that we've had people come in, they're like, oh my gosh, prostitution. And there's a lot of terminology that gets mixed up that I just want to talk about so people understand the difference of sex exploitation versus human trafficking versus prostitution. Can we talk about the definitions of those, just so we have some clarity of what those differences are or how they're not different?
Yeah. So one thing that is a huge thing is they always say, like, if there's a prostitute that's under the age of 18, that is not prostitution, that is sex trafficking 100% of the time, because if she's under the age of 18, she's not an adult. And so just up front, like, coming to be an advocate for any teenagers that have been forced to be prostitutes, that we recognize that, if they're under the age of consent, then we want to make sure that they know that they're being a victim of that situation.
So what's the difference of sex exploitation versus human trafficking?
Well, human trafficking, as Mary said, it involves sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and the different forms. The difference between prostitution and sex trafficking, many people will say there's no difference.
Right.
I was going to say, it's so blurred.
It really is. And this is what we really try to do here and encourage people to do, is not to look at people and categorize them based on just what we see on the surface. So we really have to look at their history. But there are women and men out there that prostitute out of choice. They aren't forced, they aren't coerced or anything like that. They may choose to do that for whatever reason, but we believe that's probably very small numbers. But many of them, when you begin to look at the timeline, their trauma in their life, what's happened, you can step back and see very quickly that they may be doing what they're doing for survival, maybe what they know, maybe what they've been somewhere along the line did not feel they had another option. And so we really try to look at the individual individually and what's going on in their story.
Well, and so often the individual doesn't initially identify with being trafficked. Like they see themselves as being a prostitute instead of saying I was trafficked, even though you can look at the circumstances and point out the trafficker and they'll say, oh no, he didn't make me do that, or she didn't make me do that. But then again, you have to really peel back the layers. It's a little bit easier for other people to see, but she still may identify as a prostitute, even though she really was being trafficked. Sometimes it takes years for women or for young men to really identify as being trafficked.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that you mentioned. You said that they're forced to, but that force, when you think of force, you think of somebody physically making them do that. But in the sex trafficking trade, that can look a lot more like grooming or coercion, to where it's acceptable. They've slowly but surely come to think that it's acceptable behavior and that it's okay.
Well, there's a trauma bond between the trafficker and the young woman. And so that's what holds them together. It's not chains. It's not something physical. It's that trauma bond. And again, it can look a lot of different ways, but, you know, the Polaris Project also says that in those cases, traffickers will use physical beatings. They will use lack of sleep, like they won't let the lady sleep. They will use, you know, just manipulating their physical needs. They'll display weapons to them. So I've read a lot of accounts of traffickers displaying a gun or displaying a knife and telling them, I'm going to kill you, you know, or in 10 days, or I'm going to kill you if you don't come back and do this. But that becomes so normalized to her that she doesn't realize that that's, you know, like that's why she's doing this, or that's, maybe she realizes why she's doing that, but like that it's not normal for that to happen. And that in and of itself makes him a trafficker. But, you know, I think one story that really stood out to me there's a memoir called For Girls Like Us, is this lady was working at a strip club, and she initially got in because she needed food to eat. And so she thought, well, I'll just work here for a week or two and then I'll go somewhere else. And of course, she ended up a pimp came along and ended up forcing her to work there longer. And when she would come home without having the quota that he had asked her to have, he would beat her. And one day she went to the strip club and she had marks on her face, or maybe on her arms or something, from him beating her. And the strip club owner got angry that he had beat her, but he didn't get angry just that he had beat her. He had gotten angry that he had beat her in a way that the clients would see the bruises. And so then that strip club owner told the trafficker, if you're going to beat her in the back of the head, because that way the clients don't see that. And so I think that just kind of shows you the mindset that they're in, and that's the environment. And that's how it's kind of coming across. But it takes a long time for the ladies to say, no, I do get to keep some of my money. But if she's not free to stop, and if she's not free to take all of her money, then, you know, then it's not of her own will.
Yeah, one of the things that they do is give them just an illusion of control, right? And so they live under the illusion that they do have control, and which again kind of plays into the whole guilt messages that they have and carry, that they did have control, they could have stopped, they did have a choice. You know, when we move them into a place of recovery and healing, that's one of the things that we really have to work through, is that shame and that guilt.
Yeah, we just have a couple really quick minutes left, and that's one thing that I do want to make sure that we cover is the warning signs of how do you know, what do you look for? I've heard of people say, you know, it could be the person next door to you, it could be the person on the flight, it could be the person eating at the restaurant, you know, that you see sitting over there with somebody that it doesn't look right. What are some of those warning signs? What should people look for when they're looking at them?
Yeah, I definitely think if they feel it and believe they need to ask something, do it, right? Err on the side of caution. Some of the things some of the things that you can ask them is, do you have access to a phone, or do you handle your own money? You know, do you feel safe? Do you have somewhere to sleep tonight? You know, different things like that, just questioning them about their life to be able to determine, you know, they might look good on the surface and everything might look well, but when you ask specific questions like that, they have to do around finances or communication, you know, lodging, those are often indicative. Even if they, you know, were to tell you something that wasn't true, you can often tell in their voice and their facial expressions and things like that. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask. It's better to err on the side of caution.
Absolutely. It could save somebody's life.
Yeah. So I've seen different accounts where like someone noticed at their house or in their neighborhood that there were just all sorts of cars coming to the house next door with kind of no real explanation of why there were all these different cars coming and going at all different hours. And so he actually put up like a deer hunting camera. And so he put that out, and then he ended up turning that camera into the police, and it ended up being a house that they were running prostitution, you know, they were running a trafficking ring out of. And so the people were coming to purchase sex there. And so just like Gina said, like it's really hard to say, but if something feels off, go ahead and say something. That's the big thing is like, if you see something, say something. But I think too, if it's a friend or a family member, if she has a boyfriend that's really beginning to isolate her, you know, I would dig into that. And just make sure she's okay.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough. I love hanging out with you, and we're definitely going to have both of you back on the podcast for some more podcasts in the future. I just would encourage anybody that's listening that if they have any questions or they want to learn any more about human trafficking, where should they go?
Yeah.
Mary, I'll let you share
Okay,
about our
sure.
human trafficking awareness.
Yeah, so we do have a human trafficking awareness, a one-on-one class here. So if you're local, you can sign up for that. I would say too, so we have a couple amazing national partners, Operation Underground Railroad. Their websites and their videos are incredible. They rescue about 150 women and children out of trafficking each month. They focus on the rescue and the prosecution of traffickers. And then also the Samaritan Women Institute for Shelter Care that we have a partnership with. They are really looking at the overall picture, the overall landscape in the U.S. of shelter care for survivors of trafficking. And so, as we said earlier, there's about 300,000 victims of sex trafficking in the U.S. right now. But according to the Samaritan Women Institute for Shelter Care, there's only about 1,300 beds for those 300,000. And so that's why they're really focused on making sure that there's more shelters out there, more programs out there that can help address the needs that survivors have.
All right. Well, thank you so much.